What do you do when it's too windy? We have a picture here of boats sailing in normal weather, and they are, I suppose, managing quite nicely, sitting gently on the side deck. Nobody needs to lean out. This is sort of, force 3 maybe, sort of 10 knots or under. Nice weather to go sailing in. If it gets a little bit windier, you will find a dinghy in particular a little bit more difficult to manage. You're going to have to sit out more. You're going to have to lean out more over the side of the boat. And you might indeed be spilling wind, whereby you won't have your sails in the normal position. You'll let them out a bit further, especially when you're beating or going to windward. Now, there are other little tricks you can try in a sailboat, especially a dinghy, to make it a little bit easier to sail in adverse conditions or when it gets too windy. And one of those, there are various little mechanisms for stretching the sail and flattening the sail. If you look at some of these sails, you'll see that they're curved. They have a bit of a belly in them. That catches the wind more, pushes it over more, so you're working a lot harder to keep the boat upright. Well, you can flatten your sail in sailing. There are various controls. There's what we call the kicker or the vang, which is a diagonal rope or mechanism. It's a series of pulleys indeed. It goes from the boom about where my cursor is down to the bottom of the mast, down to about here. And you can pull on that, you can bend the boom slightly, and indeed it also pushes the boom forward slightly. And that has the effect of taking a lot of the belly out of the sail, flattens the sail, so that you can be a little bit more comfortable for a few more knots of wind. Another thing you can do, of course, is, as I mentioned earlier, you can spill wind and not take in the sails so much. You can also stretch the sail. You can pull the sail out to the end of the boom. There's a mechanism whereby you can do that. And you can indeed pull the sail down a little at the front. There's another little mechanism there. So you can do all these things, stretch your sail, use your kicker to flatten the sail more and more. And that will take a lot of the pressure off you. But eventually it gets perhaps a bit too much. And you're really then, if you're going to stay out sailing, you're really looking at a situation whereby you're going to reduce sail. Now, you can do that in two ways. You can take your mainsail down, your big mainsail, take that down and put a smaller one up. Some boats do that. They carry smaller sails. But by and large, what you will do is you will reef. And that's a mechanism whereby you can reduce the size of your sail. So instead of having a full sail right up to the top of the mast, you can fold it up down at the bottom and pull it down. And we'll have a look at how that's done now. That's a picture of the end of a boom, the outside end of a boom. And it's a boat that is about to be reefed. Now, I didn't have time to, unfortunately, today I had a few things on. I didn't have time to hunt out better pictures. But this shows you the kind of mechanisms that you would have for reefing. You've got a rope going up to this hole in the sail, and you can pull that rope down, and you've a similar mechanism over at the mast, and you can pull the sail down to the boom and reduce it in size. And these little reefing points, as they're called, they come in lines. There's a line of them along there, and there's another line along here. And you tie those around the boom when you get it down. You've obviously heard of a reef knot, and a reef knot is a very simple double overhand knot, and that's what it's used for, or that's where it originated. You know, the tying of these ties around the boom to reduce the sail area. And there's a schematic here now which shows you a boat which has reefed. You can see that the sail is much smaller. Instead of going all the way up to the top of the mast, it's now just about 2/3 the way up and down. And you can reduce, depending on the number of reefing points you have in, you can reduce your sail quite significantly. Now, you also need to reduce your jib. You also need to reduce the size of your jib after a while. Some people have roller reefing, whereby the jib rolls around a special spar or filament at the front of the boat. Other people would take the jib down and put up a smaller one. There are various mechanisms for this. If the wind gets too much for you, you can just take the jib down altogether and just sail on the mainsail. You'll be able to get along quite happily like that. And now, of course, you obviously have the option of not going out at all if the weather is going to be bad. Let's be honest about it. And a lot of us do that. We turn up for a race, for example, and say, no, better things to be doing. And you go home rather than go out in. But it can be fun out in windy weather. Obviously, if things go too bad, this sort of thing might happen to you. You can have a capsize in a dinghy. Keelboats, obviously, you don't capsize in them by and large. And if you do, you have a serious problem. But dinghies are designed to float even when they're upside down, even when they're filled with water. And these guys have just capsized their dinghy. One of them is doing the right thing and the other is doing the wrong thing. The guy who's doing the wrong thing is this fella here, who is trying to keep his feet dry at all costs, instead of perhaps just getting into the water, swimming around the back of the boat and coming up where this guy is and helping him raise the boat. Dinghies are very easy to get upright again. As I said, they float, they have built-in buoyancy. They're very easy to get up. In very bad conditions, if you have a spinnaker up, for example, it might make it a little bit more difficult. And you might blow over again, but by and large, they're very straightforward. Now, this shows you how you right a dinghy if you are unfortunate enough to go for a swim. And this woman here is on the center board, the kind of a keel arrangement, if you like, on the underside of the boat. And she's standing on that and she's holding onto the gunwale. And her crew is in the water and he's pulling down on the board as well. And within less than a minute, that boat will be upright again. If she's very clever, she can step straight in as the boat comes over and, not get any more than her feet wet. The boat will be full of water, but you get out a bucket and you bail it. Or some designs of boat self-drain. They drain themselves. You just wait a minute or two and all the water drains out and off you go sailing again. One of the things, incidentally, if you are in a capsized situation, and we'll demonstrate this for you, incidentally, some Saturday mornings, we will actually take a boat out into the harbour, turn it upside down, or turn it up on its side, as the case may be, and show you how we go about getting it upright. It's all great fun. It's all great fun. One of the things to do, of course, and they have managed this, is they have the boat pointing roughly into the wind. The wind appears to be blowing back that way, and they have the boat more or less pointing into the wind, and that's a good thing, because when the boat comes up, the sails will simply flap. They won't fill with wind and possibly pull the boat over again, and you'll have to go through this all over again. And if the boat isn't pointing into the wind when you start to get it upright again, simply get the crew to hang on to the front of it here and kick his way around into the wind. And it's very, very easy to sort of half swim the boat around to get it into the wind. And then when it pops up, the sails are just flapping. The water will drain out, or if you have to, you get your crew in. You get your crew to bail out the boat while you sort out your ropes and everything and go off sailing again. Experienced sailors will have that boat upright within a couple of minutes and ready to sail again. This is a boat on its way up. They've managed to get it upright. And as you can see, I don't know whether that's the crew or the skipper, but he's stepping off the center board here as the boat comes up towards the camera, and he's making his way back into the boat. His crew, unfortunately, is still in the water, but I don't think he or she is likely to come to any grief. In some situations, you can scoop the crew into the boat as it's coming up again, but again, we'll demonstrate that to you on Saturday mornings. This is a boat about to capsize, and I imagine he's probably had a jibe in very windy weather that went wrong. And the boom has come over with the mainsail in the jibe. They're all on the pretty well on the right side of the boat. He's trying to sit out there to balance the boat, but the boom has become trapped in the water. And what that means is the wind is now coming from behind them. And as you can see, the conditions are very, very windy. This is an extreme situation, and most of you are unlikely to encounter it, quite frankly. But the boom gets trapped and fills with wind. And because it can't continue to blow around, it heels the boat over even more. So, and the skipper, the helmsman, looks as if he's hanging onto the tiller, trying to straighten up the boat. And in reality, what he should do is let it go and have a metaphorical cup of tea. And it's amazing how boats will right themselves. They'll pop back up into the wind. The tendency of a modern sailboat, when you leave it to its own devices, is to swivel around towards the wind. And very often, that's all you need to do. You don't have control, and if you're racing, you like to have control, but it's an easy solution. We talked last week about what you could do to avoid a jibe, and I found this nice little illustration which sums it up, I think. If it's very, very windy, and I mean, if light weather, the sort of weather we'll be going out in on Saturday mornings, won't be all that challenging. But if it's very, very windy and you were, say, racing, and you would normally go around to mark, and you can see here's the wind, it's coming down this way. The boat is going to end up going down this way. So the sail is going to come over as he turns around, and it's going to go over to the other side, and that's the jibe. Now, in very, very windy weather, as you can see, it doesn't always work out very well. The boat can get heeled over. This is a similar situation to the last picture we were looking at, where the boom got trapped in the water. You can just make out the boom here. And again, if you let go of that tiller, or just use the tiller extension and let the tiller fly around, the boat might come up into the wind and everything will be hunky-dory again. But very often you like to try and keep control. So an alternative to that happening, in other words, your boom coming over very violently with the wind behind it, is to do what I called the last night a chicken jibe. So this is an ordinary jibe where you come around, and at this point here, as you turn the boat, the boom swings over, and if it's very windy, it's got the full weight of the wind behind it, and it pushes, and it can actually spin the boat a little, and which you don't necessarily want if you're not ready for it. So let's have a look at the alternative. So instead of coming around this way, jibing here and carrying on this way, what he does is he comes down, goes around into the wind, executes a normal tack, and the wind will, the sail will move over for him and sails down this way. So it takes a little bit longer, but you don't experience the potential violence of a jibe. But it's a nice way of, you know, staying upright in very, very windy conditions in a dinghy. And we call it a chicken jibe, and it's probably not a nice thing to call it. It implies cowardice or, you know, not stepping up to the plate or something like that. But, you know, if you go out there to sail, you don't go out to swim, you know, so if you can avoid any precarious situations, you should do so. So do jibes affect, heavy jibes, do they affect keelboats? Not in this sense. A keelboat isn't going to capsize, but you can damage a keelboat. Again, if you're sailing in extremely windy conditions, you can have a situation where you can actually break something. You can break a boom. You can break a mast even, you know, but booms are particularly fickle things. I sailed on a boat in a long distance race once, and it broke its boom twice. Not while I was on board, I hasten to add, but in other legs of this particular race. So so there you go. We have some more heavy weather pictures there. That's a particularly good example. That's a single-handed boat. that is an ideal situation there now, where they're going to get that boat up quite happily. Reefing and all of that. And these guys, yeah. A thing you want to avoid if you do have a capsize is you want to avoid turning the boat turtle. And this lad here who's clambering up from the cockpit, whereas this particular man probably just stepped over the side as the boat went over and managed to get his leg on the centerboard to start getting it upright, as you can see in this situation. That's what he's aiming to do, but he's not helped by this guy, who quite likely is going to pull the boat right over by his weight, and they will what's known as turn the boat turtle. The mast will be sticking down towards the bottom. The boat will be completely upside down, as opposed to just halfway. This is an ideal situation if you have a capsize, to stop it going fully turtle, preserve it in that position, and you'll get it up very, very quickly and very, very easily. Whereas if it turns right over, things are a little bit more difficult. And also, if you're in the water, getting out of the water onto the hull of an upturned boat can be difficult. You know, it's very slippy, it's very slidey. On my boat, I put lines along just under the side deck there, running along the boat, that you can use as stirrups to you know, raise your leg and get into. They're spring loaded or elastic loaded, and you can get your foot into them and get up that way. So generally speaking, if you're going to be in the water, get into the water, swim around. You'll have a much easier righting, and you'll get the boat upright and away. Capsizes are actually very rare. We go into them more for a safety situation than anything else. We talk about them because it is a risk. It is something that can happen. Okay, anybody, any questions on heavy weather sailing? Light weather sailing, incidentally, can pose challenges as well, and you might need to adjust your sails a little bit there, especially when you're beating. If the wind goes extremely light, you have to open the slot a little bit. That's the gap between the jib and the back of the main. You might have to play around with that a little bit to keep your boat going upwind. But I mean, you're in no danger, shall we say, if the wind falls too light.
Gerry, if it looks like it's going to be windy, do you typically go out with the sail reefed and then unreef it, or do you do it the other way? Like,
yeah, it's easier to take out a reef than put it in. That's if you have, not all boats have reefing points, but I've often gone out reefed in windy weather. My crew is very light, so we work a little bit harder in very strong winds. So I've often put up a sail which can be reefed, which I've reefed, and gone out sailing. I actually won a race once. I went out reefed, and everybody else seemed to capsize at some stage or another, and I didn't, because I was reefed. So that was nice. But you will go slower if you're reefed. There's no doubt about it, compared to other boats. Yeah.
Gerry?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you're racing, would you be more inclined to perform a chicken jibe or not? Or would that be conditions?
No, you're more inclined to do a full jibe, an ordinary jibe, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have done chicken jibes while I've been racing, simply because conditions were fairly horrendous. But by and large, you will take chances, I suppose, when you're racing. I mean, I have capsized twice while racing in the last 5 years. And in each case, I had a spinnaker up, and I jibed it with the spinnaker. I jibed with the spinnaker up, and obviously came to grief. Some people will actually take the spinnaker down, jibe, and put the spinnaker up again in very heavy weather. It is quite possible to jibe a spinnaker and get away with it, but sometimes you're just unlucky. You know, the more sail you have up, the greater the likelihood you have of capsizing in a jibe. And curiously enough, the least problematic point of sailing in strong winds is beating, where you're going to windward. You will work harder, You'll have to lean out a lot more, to keep the boat right, hike out, as we call it. But if anything goes wrong, if you're hit by a gust, it's easier to get out of a tricky situation simply by spilling wind. You just simply let go of the main sheet a little bit, or let the jib out a little bit, and luff up a little more. That's what we call luff up. Is what we call going up into the wind a little bit more, pop her up into the wind a little bit more. That can often reduce heeling and make the boat easier to keep upright. It's a thing we encourage people to try and get out and do a little bit of racing. It's a great way of learning all the moves very, very quickly, because you sail every point of sailing several times during a race. You do a bit of beating, you do a bit of reaching, you do a bit of running, and there's plenty of rescue boats around you. Generally speaking, if my crew isn't available, I will take somebody from the just sailing community, as it were, on board and give them a look at sailing. Most of them never come back again. I can't understand that.
That's because they end up in the sea, Gerry.
Yeah.
After doing a chicken jive.
John, we won't tell you what he's done to some just sailors.
It was all with the best intentions.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So, any other questions? We've about 9 minutes to go.
I do have a question. Is there rules of the sea, so to speak, like right of way, especially when you're sailing? The person on the left has right of way or something like that.
Yeah, between sailing boats, if you are on what we call starboard tack, in other words, the wind is coming in from the right-hand side of the boat, you have precedence over somebody who is on port tack, in other words, where the wind is coming in over the left-hand side of the boat. And so in racing, certainly you have right of way. And even on a general basis, if two boats meet, the one that's on starboard tack usually has right of way and is waved through, as it were. There are other situations. A windward boat, in other words, a boat that is to windward of you, gives way. It has to keep clear. But yes, there are situations. We can go into them at some stage. I was tempted to give a talk on racing and do the rules, as the very simple rules. But we certainly will do it on Saturday mornings. Every Saturday morning when it's too windy to go sailing, Helen has a cake and I have a flip chart, and we do another talk, and we'll cover some of this stuff again. People will be curious about things. They'll ask us to do stuff, and we're quite happy to do that for you. Yeah, quite happy.
In your experience, Gerry, when people start off sailing, what are the mistakes most commonly made that you've seen people make?
Oh.
Is that a too difficult question to answer?
Where do I start?
That's the fun of it, I suppose. Yeah. I'm just trying to give you a question, keep you thinking there.
Yeah, it depends. Some people are they're nervous about sitting out on the side of the boat, for example, to keep it upright, which I can never understand. I would think that's sort of self-explanatory, but getting them on the side of the boat to hold the tiller, pulling the tiller the wrong way, pushing instead of pulling, bearing away instead of luffing. You can get that wrong, but you will usually know immediately when you're starting to turn in the wrong direction. You'll know immediately that you should be going in the other direction. You pull it the other way. By and large, you push the tiller in the direction opposite to the way in which you intend to go. But it's almost like steering a car backwards, as it were. You turn the wheel to the left instead of to go right, and so forth. But you'll get the hang of that fairly easily. Yeah. The other thing, I suppose, is that people have their sails not pulled in tight enough. Sails are always too loose. They're on a beat and they have their sails set for a reach, shall we say. So that's another thing. But again, they're little mistakes that you get your head around very quickly.
Gerry, is there any way of explaining the ropes that are on? You know, there's the blue and the yellow. You know what they're actually controlling and how, or
yeah. There is, well, they're not color coded, as it were. A rope that's attached to a sail is known as a sheet, and what you use that for is to pull the sail in and out. And it's a very simple control. The other ropes that you would have on a boat, I suppose, there are the control lines, things that control the kicking strap, things that control other controls like the outhaul to flatten the sail, the Cunningham. There are various little things like that. But to start with, all you have to worry about are the jib sheet, the rope that controls the jib, and the main sheet, the rope that controls the main. Don't get upset about anything else. It's all very straightforward. Putting up the sails then are two other ropes that are fairly important, and we call them halyards. And a halyard is anything you use to raise a sail with. And again, they're very straightforward, very straightforward. Again, we do a lot of, again, if it's too windy to go sailing, we'll practice rigging, you know, putting up the sails and taking them down again. And I've even been known to show how to fly a spinnaker in the yard, which can be very exciting in windy weather. So we've 3 minutes left. Any other questions? Okay.
Sorry, Ger.
Yes.
The same theory applies from the dinghy right up to the yachts. Is that right?
Absolutely. If you can sail a dinghy, you can sail a yacht. And everything we've done today and in the previous days will apply. It's totally scalable. It scales up to a bigger boat. Where people have difficulty is if coming down from a yacht, as you call it, to a dinghy. And yacht sailors are people who've done nothing but sail in yachts.
Right.
Not very good, by and large, at sailing dinghies, I have discovered. So you're also probably wondering what's going to happen with the club for the rest of the season. I've just got 2 minutes, and I'll just talk very briefly about that. If it's any consolation to you, in Darwin, Northern Australia, they're reopening the sailing club very shortly, and coming out of lockdown. And I imagine that sailing will be one of those things, providing there aren't too many people on the boat. Hopefully, sailing will be one of those sports which will get the green light when normal times return, if indeed they ever do. As I've said before, we meet on Saturday mornings. We go sailing. We have little trips. You know, we go to Loch Shinny. We go to Balbriggan. We've been to Rush and things like that. And we hope to do a lot more of that around the islands and so forth. As well as if we just need to practice our maneuvers, we just sail around the bay and practice tacking or booting or running or whatever. And then coming in, of course, for coffee. We have a special deal for people who are not members, and it is membership at half price for the first year. And this also includes use of boats, use of people like myself and Helen and Kieran and the various people who run Just Sailing. And we basically teach you to sail for nothing, so you get 300 or 400 quid's worth of value out of us that way, which is terrific. And I think it works out at about your first year's sub would be about 165. Is that right, Helen?
Yeah. 165.
165, which is for nothing. And on top of that, we teach you to sail. So, and you have use of the boats. And if you want to, you're more than welcome to take these boats out and try our hand at racing as well. We have a nice little fleet of boats. And as I think I said last week, we have a small cruiser, which I know some of you are looking very covetously at for the season, whenever the season starts. We hope to have that on the water as well.